President Trump. So why would he be worried about whether or not Putin turned up in Istanbul? He's been doing business in the Gulf. Let's talk to Alistair Dawber first, Washington correspondent for The Times. Hi to you, Alistair.
Hi, John.
What are your thoughts, Alistair? Zelensky went to Turkey under pressure from Donald Trump. He called Putin's bluff. And sure enough, Putin's invitation, it's been shown, hasn't it, to be hollow.
Completely. But I think the clip you just showed there from Donald Trump aboard Air Force One in the Middle East really shows what American thinking is. Putin was the one that proposed these talks last weekend. He hasn't shown up. Zelensky's there. The Russians sent, let's be polite, a sort of a B-team delegation to take part in these talks without any real power of progressing them. But there's Donald Trump, not criticising Putin, not saying that there'll be consequences for Russia because he's not turned up to the talks he proposed. But actually, you know what? As long as we get around the table and sit and chat and sort it all out, it'll all be fine.
Yeah.
I think this was probably Vladimir Putin's bet from the get-go. Like you suggested, I don't think there's any chance of him ever turning up and sitting across a table from Volodymyr Zelensky. I don't think that's ever going to happen. But he seems to have been given this helping hand this morning by Donald Trump's comments in the Gulf.
And we also get Donald Trump, Alistair, talking about nothing being able to happen until he sits down with Putin, which will sound to a lot of people like Trump just going out of his way to accommodate Putin and playing for time too.
I think so. I mean, there's nothing in the diary as to when this might happen. There was this idea that all three of them, Putin, Zelensky and Trump, might be in Istanbul today. That obviously hit the buffers pretty early on and was never really likely to happen. Donald Trump says that his incentive in Ukraine, if you like, is to stop the killing. But there doesn't need to be any pressure from the Americans on Putin. We talk about sanctions, but Russian banks, Russian companies, Russian individuals are already pretty heavily sanctioned by the Americans. There's not a massive amount of yardage left to go along that track. So the Americans don't really have too many levers left.
No.
Maybe a Trump-Putin summit would help, but at the moment that doesn't seem very, very soon, but very close.
It really, really does not. Just last weekend, of course, Alistair, we had those European leaders laying down what they thought was an ultimatum to Putin to come to the table or face harsh sanctions, and that was pretty much just swept aside when the President Trump demanded this meeting in Istanbul. Now, what's he saying? I didn't think it was possible for Putin to go if I'm not there, which, frankly, Alistair, it's a pretty nonsensical analysis of Putin's thinking, isn't it? Maybe just a cack-handed way for avoiding punishing Putin for his absence.
I think so. I mean, look, take the positives from this. This is the first time a Russian and Ukrainian delegation have sat down opposite each other. So that in and of itself is progress, even if the people doing the talking aren't really empowered to make any decisions. But so that's the positive to take from this. The downside, if you like, is it probably won't achieve very much. And as you suggested, Donald Trump doesn't really seem to have the power to bring this war to an end in the way that he suggested he might. He knows that it's going to depend on Vladimir Putin's decisions and whether or not the Americans can persuade the Russians that there is enough hardship to Russia by continuing the war. At the moment, the Russians' calculation clearly is that's not the case.
Now, let me ask you this, Alistair. Is there any mileage in Senator Lindsey Graham going as he has to Turkey with the idea of pushing through Congress, if possible, if he can, hard sanctions against Russia through that route? Has that plan got any mileage? Has it got any future?
Well, the Lindsey Graham plan, as I understand it, is to slap sanctions on the countries that buy Russian energy, presumably, and financial services. It brings into play other countries. Russia's done quite well at selling some of its goods to the likes of India and to China. So whether it will work or not, I don't know. It brings into play other countries. It seems to be a fiendishly complicated way of trying to punish the Russians.
Yes.
And of course, it doesn't necessarily have support from the White House. The White House at the moment is trying to cajole Vladimir Putin to get around the table and negotiate. That seems to be something that won't be helpful to achieve that end.
If you're going to hit countries that buy oil from Russia, then you're talking about hitting China. It's hard to believe that America would wish, or the White House would wish to do that. Alistair Dawber, great to talk to you, Alistair. Thank you. Now, let's get the thoughts of Andrew Finkel, who's a journalist in Istanbul now. Andrew, welcome.
Hello.
Andrew, just take us through what is going to be happening in Istanbul today and now.
Well, I was going to say your guess is as good as mine, but there is some progress, there is some news. What didn't happen is that there was no meeting between Ukrainian and Russian delegations. The Ukrainians didn't come, the Russians sent a team. Vladimir Putin didn't turn up. Volodymyr Zelensky did go to Ankara to have extended meetings with the Turkish president. And after that meeting, he said that he wouldn't be going to Istanbul, but he would be sending his foreign minister instead, his defense minister instead. By, I suppose, curious coincidence, there is a meeting in Antalya on the southern shores of Turkey between NATO foreign ministers. So that accounts for Lindsey Graham being in Turkey and Secretary of State Rubio.
Yeah, I mean, Senator Graham is certainly a Russia hawk, but his idea for sanctions, will that really fly? You have to have serious doubts about that. And meanwhile, as for whatever may happen in Istanbul now, it's pretty clear nothing significant can happen in the absence of Vladimir Putin. And there doesn't seem to be any will on the part of Putin or the Kremlin to make anything very much happen.
Well, that is certainly one interpretation. But, I mean, we talk about this being, the B team going to Istanbul from Russia, but these are not trivial people. These are, the Vladimir Medinsky, who had been, and also the Alexander Froman, who the deputy defense minister. These people had been in Istanbul in 2022 for the only face-to-face talks between Ukraine and Russia. Of course, those talks collapsed in disaster. But were there to be the will, these would be preliminary talks for a more serious negotiation. Yeah. So they can't be dismissed entirely, but I can't say we have any great expectations.
No, I mean, as far as anyone can discern, Andrew, to the extent that Russia is willing to talk, they're pretty much willing to talk the terms of a Ukrainian surrender.
Well, that was certainly the case in 2022. They weren't really negotiations. They were, as you say, they were ultimatums. And clearly it would have been incredibly embarrassing for the President Putin to come to Istanbul and sit across the table from a man who he's accused of being a neo-Nazi, not a legitimate ruler of an illegitimate country. So there was never any real prospect, I suppose, of Putin coming to face his adversary. But there could be some movement, but perhaps it's foolish of me to be optimistic.
Okay, Andrew, great to talk to you in any event. Andrew Finkel there in Istanbul.